Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to the Winning Digital Customers Livecast. I'm Howard Tiersky, and I have a fantastic guest with me today. I'm really excited for you to meet if you don't already know him. His name is Len Herstein. You may know him because he's the founder of an amazing conference called Brand Manage Camp. It happens every year. But in addition to that, he is a reserve deputy with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, and he has written an amazing new book called Be Vigilant: Strategies to Stop Complacency, Improve Performance, and Safeguard Success. And what's really cool about this book, and I really want to get into with Len, is he finds all of this interesting insight at the intersection of his work in law enforcement and his work working with brands, leadership, and the things that we all have to do today in business, which is such an interesting, rich area. And I never thought about it until I had the great fortune of getting to read Len's book. So Len, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Howard. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Anything else about your background or anything else you want to tell folks before I start peppering you with questions?
No, you already made me sound way cooler than I am. So I'm going to stick with that.
Not true. All right, cool. I love how we're opposites on the video. I'm dark background, white shirt. You're dark shirt, white background. So for anyone who's just listening, you're missing the alternating effect. In any case, all right. So, such an interesting topic around being vigilant. And, I think that there's so much in business that we stop seeing because we just get used to it. Someone was pointing out to me, I think this has been not an original insight, but even things like the save button on, like in Microsoft Word, when you go to save, is a picture of a floppy disk. And it just seems like such a normal thing to us that that's the save button. But I had one of my kids ask me the other day, like, what is that thing? Like, why is that the save button? What is that square? To them, to us, it just seems normal. But, it's like when you just stop seeing these things. And all of a sudden, one day someone asks you a question like that and you realize, yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all anymore, does it? In any case, so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your book, why you wrote it, a couple of the key insights, and from there I'll ask you some more specific questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I spent a long time in packaged goods brand marketing before I started my company. I worked for Coca-Cola and Nabisco and Campbell Soup Company and base business and innovation. And then when I started Brand Manage Camp back in 2003, it was to, deliver the conference that I always wanted to go to. And so that's why we put it together, and we've been doing that for 19 years. And back in 2015, I started thinking about how I really wanted to start giving back. I wanted to get into some volunteerism, and I wanted to add a different element to my life. And this opportunity came up to become a reserve sheriff's deputy, Douglas County, Colorado. And it was not one of these things that I always, it's not like I grew up always wanted to be a cop, or like, always had this desire to do it or anything like that. It just all of a sudden it kind of hit me. I was like, man, this would be a really cool way to give back. It was kind of in a time. I mean, obviously we've been in a time recently that there's a lot of contention between society and law enforcement and things of that sort. That all was all starting back in 2014, 2015 with Ferguson and everything that was going on back then. And I really wanted to be part of the solution as opposed to just someone who complained on Facebook about the problems, and so this opportunity came up. I went through a full academy. I went through a full training, field training, and I became, a certified peace officer in the state of Colorado, and I do it for free. And I started out thinking that this was going to be completely different than anything I had ever done. It was going to be a different part of my life. But I started to see that there was some overlap. There were things I was learning in this later stage of my life as I was being trained as a law enforcement officer, that I was seeing the parallels back to business and life. And now, and the first and the most powerful one was this idea that we learned, which is complacency kills. And complacency kills in law enforcement, and we have to be constantly aware of it and careful of it. But I started thinking, you know what? Complacency kills businesses. It kills brands. It kills organizations. It kills relationships and marriages and all sorts of things. And I became intrigued by this, and I started thinking about, man, there's so much that we can learn. And just like you just said, you've never really thought about it before. I had never really thought about it before, but it became all so clear to me. It was one of these things where it's just a light bulb goes off, and that's where the book came from. And the book is all about strategies that we use every day in law enforcement to fight complacency with vigilance, and how that applies back to business and life, and how we can use that. And when you read the book, as you have, you can you start seeing that there are things that I can start doing right now, today, right in this very minute to help me fight complacency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you might be like, Len, it's in my book. Didn't you read the book? But I'm asking because I want the people to hear, right? So,
yeah, of course.
So first of all, I think we can all intuitively understand why complacency is problematic. If you're a police officer, you think everything's safe. You walk down that same street you've walked down 100 times, and you don't notice a danger that might be there to you or to somebody else. Can you just talk a little bit though about what are the areas of business where you think complacency is the greatest risk or danger?
Yeah. So, first, let me take one step back and just kind of define complacency, right? So we all talk about it. We all use the word. We might, we hear it. I watch a lot of sports over the weekend, and you'll hear it all the time. People in the announcers say, "Oh, they're getting complacent," or "This is, let's not get complacent." But nobody ever talks about what that means, right? And what it actually is, right? So to me, complacency is overconfidence. It's self-satisfaction. It's a smugness that leads to an unawareness of actual dangers and threats. Okay. So it's something that is lurking in the background all the time. It's not something that you can cure and have it go away. I don't like talking about viruses in this world of COVID, but before COVID, I would talk about it in terms of it's a virus lurking, just waiting for the right host, right? Just waiting for the right conditions to come about. And those conditions of overconfidence, self-satisfaction. Now in business, where that comes into play is in a lot of different areas, right? So, it comes into competition, right? So not being aware of competition or becoming too focused on current competition and missing where the next competition is coming from and not understanding your vulnerabilities. It manifests itself in terms of when businesses get complacent, they send off a signal that invites competition, right? That invites attack. It's just like in law enforcement, we talk about things like keeping our uniforms neat and keeping our shoes shine. It's not because of inspections and this and that. It's because of the signal it sends to people that we deal with as to whether or not we are buttoned up and ready to perform or whether or not we have become complacent, right? Mm-hmm. And when we look complacent, we invite attack, right? And when we look buttoned up, we repel attack. They go somewhere else, right? And that's the same thing in business. So threat awareness in terms of understanding where all that is coming from. There's also dangers in complacency internally, right? So we can talk about external in terms of, not only competition, but also how we interact with our vendors, right? And how we interact with everybody outside of our organization. And we can get into things like, balance of power and things of that sort. But also internally in terms of culture, in terms of our employees and whether they're engaged, right? One of the main ways to allow our employees to get disengaged from the business is for us to get complacent and ignore some of the signals and ignore some of the things that are going on that can prevent that. So there are dangers internal and external all around us all the time as organizations. I even think, so, forget about the life and death aspect of it, right? So, in law enforcement, we are in danger of complacency, of becoming complacent, and those are dangers. But a lot of the times what happens is those dangers don't come to fruition because not everybody we come in contact with is out to hurt us, right? When you're in business, your competition wakes up every day looking for ways to hurt you, right? They will find that vulnerability like that. You don't have the luxury of going a year or a month or a few days of being complacent because there is somebody out there looking to take advantage of that.
Yeah. As you're talking, it reminds me of a book from many years ago that Andy Grove, from the CEO of Intel, wrote called, I think it was called Only the Paranoid Survive or something along those lines. And I'm not sure I ever read the book, honestly, but when I heard the title of the book, and I think I understand where he's coming from, but it also kind of stressed me out, and I thought, gosh, I don't want to go around every day paranoid. Now, I know you're not saying to be paranoid, of course. But no. But how do you find the line between making sure that you're not victim of the dangers of complacency, but not walking around all day long every day stressed out, thinking there's someone around the corner trying to shoot you? Because I would imagine even as a peace officer, I know from all my work with Tony Robbins that people are at their best when they're relaxed, when they're not stressed. And so how do you find the balance between not being stressed, but not being complacent?
Yeah. It's a great question. And it's something when you started bringing up that book, I don't believe and I talk about this in the book, as you know, the opposite of complacency to me is not paranoia, right? The opposite of complacency is vigilance. And that's why I call the book Be Vigilant and not Be Paranoid, right? And the difference is this: paranoia is the fear of what could possibly happen, right? The fear of everything. Vigilance is the awareness, right? And so it's important to be aware, and that awareness allows you to fight that complacency. But it doesn't mean you have to be in a state of paranoia where you're constantly always looking over your shoulder and you're constantly scared, right? So the idea is not to be scared, it's to be so confident that you know of where everything can come from, and that you're confident of your desire to not become overconfident, right? So the desire to stay on top of where can the threats come from? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Right? All these questions that we get into in the book, it's that vigilance that allows you to remain calm, right? Because you know, one of the things we talk about is the worst time to figure out what you're going to do in a crisis is when you're in the crisis, right? So we talk about the need to understand what those crises could be and plan your behaviors and plan your responses beforehand. So when they happen, you already know what you're going to do, right? That's why we don't panic when we're in, a stressful situation in law enforcement, because we've trained for these situations, right? And we have a saying that you don't rise above your level of training when stress comes. You fall down to your level of training when stress comes, right? And so, what happens is you will go back to what you know. And so that's why we train so hard in terms of what are the things that can happen. We train for school, active shooters. We train for all sorts of different situations so that when they do happen, we're not scared. We're not panicking. We just go into action. We know what we're going to do.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So from a business perspective, perhaps you can share, if someone's sitting here listening going, okay, you've convinced me that, it's funny. I feel like people become complacent about complacency. You know what I mean? It's almost like you can even think like, well, I think I know what the threats are, but I think there's a risk that we don't even realize how complacent we are.
Right.
What are some concrete things people could take away from this to say, okay, if I'm going to go, you've convinced me that this is something I need to put more attention to. Here are a few things that I can go do right away.
Yeah, absolutely. The book is filled with 10. So 10, the final 10 chapters, or there's a conclusion, but there's 10 chapters on 10 specific strategies that you can employ to help you fight complacency, right? And we talk about, first thing that we talk about is this idea of survivorship bias, and understanding that just because you've survived doesn't mean you've been successful. And just because what you've done in the past worked doesn't mean it's going to work in the future, right? And that's a basic understanding that you have to get out of this mindset of overconfidence that comes with survival, right? If you ever seen the memes about I survived lead paint and drinking from the hose and spankings and all this stuff, right? Well, yeah, and riding around in cars without seat belts, yeah, of course you did. But then anybody who didn't can't actually say they didn't because they're not here. So that's what survivors. It looks like everybody who did that is doing the right thing, but you don't see everything else. So that's step number one. But there's 10 specific things I can tell you. I'll tell you about a couple of them for whatever time we have.
Well, we got 10 or 15 minutes here left, so pick a few. Yeah, I'd love for people to get a taste, and then of course we'll give it at the end as well. But you want to go on Amazon or wherever you like to get your books from. You want to pre-order Len's book, which comes out. Was it October? It was middle of October, right? What's the date that it
October 14th is the actual ship date.
Yeah. So what I would suggest, if you're listening to this. Of course, who knows? They could be listening to it a year from now because these things are archived. But if you're listening to this before October 14th of 2021, before you forget, I suggest you go pre-order the book, because what's going to happen if you don't do it now, if you think, oh, it's coming out in a couple of weeks, I'll get it then. Well, are you going to remember? So don't be complacent about getting that book. I suggest you go pre-order it right now, or you can go to the website, bevigilantbook.com, and get the links to wherever you like to get it, whether it's for your Nook or your Apple book or whatever else. But in any case, do that because you're going to want the book. But so Len's not going to be able to give you everything, but he's going to give you as much as he can. And I appreciate that. So anything you could tell our audience that they can get started right away, because they can't wait, man. They can't wait a month for your book to stop being complacent. So you have to give them something to tide them over while they wait for the book.
Absolutely. So here's some basic things that you can start doing right away. The first thing I already kind of mentioned was this idea of threat awareness. Right? Threat awareness is something that we spend a lot of time on in law enforcement. I talk in the book about how cops are notoriously terrible to go to dinner with. or go to a restaurant with. My family knows this firsthand, and anybody who has any law enforcement or military in the family knows this too. When I go into a restaurant, I have specific places that I will sit, right? Because I need to be able, not to be paranoid, but I just want to be able to be aware of what's around me. I want to be able to see where people are coming from, where the exits are. I don't like having my back to people, things of that sort. I'm not saying that you need to do that as a civilian, but the transition of that to business is the idea of you have to make sure that you are constantly remaining aware of where your threats can come from. And your threats could come from competition. They can come from vendors. They can come from government. They can come from climate change. They can come from a lot of different places and areas, right? And so you have to have someone within your organization whose job it is to remain aware. And maybe it's multiple people's jobs, right? When you see two police officers parked side by side with their noses facing different ways, right? People might feel like we're just, chilling out and relaxing, right?
I thought that was the donut exchange. One's got
exactly.
the box and he's handing over some to the other ones.
I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it is. You know what I mean? We do like our donuts, but seriously, that is, a lot of times we have a lot of reports to write. We have a lot of things that we have to do that take our eyes off what's going around us and put us on a computer that's in our car. Well, that's really easy to lose sight of what's going around you. So when we park side by side, we're taking our responsibility for threat awareness from 360 degrees to 180 degrees, right? We're automatically cutting it in half. So all I have to do is keep alert of what's in front of me. My partner can keep alert of what's in front of him or her. And now we've cut that in half, and we have responsibility for making sure that if someone's coming up, we make the other person alert. We know what we're going to do. We know how we're going to act and all those types of things. Who within your organization right now is responsible for threat awareness, right? And who's responsible for making sure that you don't fall into some of the common traps? One of the traps I talk about is this idea that I call the Roadrunner effect. Anybody who remembers the Roadrunner cartoon with Wile E. Coyote, right? What did Wile E. Coyote do that was his fatal flaw? He became so focused on what he thought was his only competition that he would lose sight of his surroundings, and his surroundings would always come back and haunt him, right? And everything around him. So if I ask you who's your competition, and you can very easily rattle off your three major competitors and how you react to them, I might start thinking one of the things I want to make you aware of is you might have become complacent, right? Because if you only have three competitors and you think you only have three competitors, you're probably wrong, because there's somebody else waiting in the wings. People in solar energy never thought Tesla was coming for them, right? But Tesla came for them. Right. And so these are the things that you have to see happening around you. So threat awareness, and I talk about a whole chapter on that in terms of how do you maintain awareness of your threats and how do you plan for them. Right. A second thing that I talk about, which a lot of people have never heard this concept before, it's called the OODA loop and getting off the X. Right. So the OODA loop is OODA. So it stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And it comes from, military things where they came up with this kind of idea of fighter jets and how the decision process works and how they can make their decisions faster and how they can make their opponents make their decisions slower. And what they realize is that we all go through this loop. We observe, we orient, we decide, and we act. We do it all the time. We don't even know we're doing it. The common thing, when you're driving home, you don't even remember how you got there. Well, your mind was still observing, orienting, deciding, and act. It's just everything was going according to plan. When someone pulls out in front of you, though, all of a sudden things change, right? And you have to now re-observe, reorient, redecide. You're not going straight anymore. You're swerving, and you have to act, right? So the goal in the OODA loop, one of the goals, is to slow down your competition by giving them new stimulus that they have to react to. Right. So it talks about this idea of getting off the X. So we talk about when we learn how to shoot in the academy, we learn to get off the X. Don't stand still. You have to move. Every time you do something, you have to move. And that makes your competition have to rethink about where you are and redecide. It slows them down. Right. And so we talk about this idea of strategic unpredictability. How can you remain strategically unpredictable? Not willy-nilly crazy unpredictable, but strategically unpredictable. And I liken it again in sports. I say, if you think about football, if you have the ball and you're running straight down the sideline, the competitor can automatically, very quickly in their mind, do the complex math that tells them what angle they have to go and what speed they have to run at, and they will intercept you and you will get tackled, right? If you start doing jukes and moves and spins, every time you do that, the competition then has to reevaluate where you are going, right? And it slows them down and makes them miss. That's what we have to do in business, right? And that's, by doing that, it prevents us from becoming complacent, because when we get complacent, we do the same thing over and over again. And what happens when that happens? We become predictable. And when we become predictable, we become vulnerable, right? And so by getting off the X, learning how to manipulate that OODA loop to slow down our competition's thought process and decision-making process, we can win that game, right? And we can stay vigilant. So that's a second thing. Another thing I talk about is the importance of debriefing. So everybody, knows the concept of a brief or a debrief, right? If you were to ask most people in business how often they debrief situations, they'll tell you that, we debrief every time something goes really wrong, right? But that's the wrong thing. Right, post-mortem, right? When something goes wrong, we get together and we figure out why. And what that usually turns into is, we call it a debrief, but it's really like, who do we assign blame to? Right? Like how can we assign blame for this?
You're right.
In law enforcement, we do debriefs all the time. Every time something happens, whether it's successful or unsuccessful. And sometimes some of the most beneficial debriefs are the ones about things that were seemingly successful, right? Because it might have been successful out of skill, or it might have been successful out of chance, right? And you might have done some things wrong that could have made it more successful, right? And there are so many ways that you can learn. And
Len, I keep losing you. Keep losing you. Your audio cuts in and out. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do about it, but
no, I'm on a wired-in internet. Yeah, I'm not sure what I could do.
Janice, is that just me, or are you hearing that too?
No, I'm hearing Len is good on my end. I hear him.
Oh, really? Okay, apologies then. Keep going. Maybe there's something on my internet. So never mind. Carry on.
Yeah, no worries. Let me know if you have troubles again. So we talk about in the book how important debriefs are to help us fight complacency, because when you have success, like we talked about, you become overconfident. But if after successful endeavors, if after successful missions, or however you define your work pieces, right, you do a debrief, right, and you do it timely, and you do it so that everybody has a say, and there's no ranks. You leave your ranks at the door, right, and you come in and you actually debrief what went right, what went wrong, what went right but could have went right better. You know what I mean? So you do all those things. It helps you fight that overconfidence and remain vigilant. So those are three things. I could go on and on. I don't know. I can give you more if you want. I don't want to go over on time or stop you from anything you want to say.
Yeah, no. Well, this is great. I want to invite you to maybe pick one more. We can do about maybe 5 more minutes. So if you have one more, but I think this is gold. And it's clear. What I love about these is it's clear what you can go do about it right now.
Yeah. You know what? Here's what I'll do. I'll rattle off a couple. I'll spend 10 seconds on each, and so you can get an idea.
Yeah. That'd be great. Like a little preview of what more is in the book. I love that.
One of the other chapters I talk about is this idea of keeping both eyes open, right? And so one of the things that we talk about in law enforcement, and anybody who learns how to handle a firearm, there are 4 rules of firearm safety. The 4th rule is be aware of your target and beyond. Right? It's so important for us to know what is beyond our target. Is there a school bus full of kids right behind our target, right? That's going to change what we're going to do, because we have other constituents that are involved in this thing that we have to understand. What happens in business a lot of time is we become so focused on our target, we forget about what's beyond our target. We forget about the attached targets, right? The influencers of our targets, the people that our targets care about, the other people who are going to chime in. And by losing sight of beyond our target, we can become complacent. So that's another thing we talk about, is how do you keep both eyes open to see not only your target, but beyond your target. I talk about accountability and transparency and how important that is. And that's a whole chapter again. And obviously this has been something that's been huge in law enforcement, but the implications are so strong for business and for life, in terms of the importance of being accountable and taking accountability for what you do, and then being transparent about what you're doing. to build trust, right? We are in a world where trust has evaporated, right? The benefit of the doubt is gone. When things go wrong, nobody assumes that you had good intentions. All they assume is the worst, right? And the less information you give them, the more opportunity they have to assume the worst. And so accountability and transparency is something I talk about in terms of what we've learned in law enforcement, body cameras, all this type of stuff, and how that relates back to business. And the last one I'll kind of mention is the idea of metrics, and how very often we are using metrics incorrectly, whether we're using the wrong metrics or whether we're using vanity metrics that tell us only what we want to know, or whether we're using too many metrics. There are so many ways that metrics can go wrong. And I talk about this idea of just because there's no blood doesn't mean there's no bleeding. And so that's something that I've learned in law enforcement. Just because I don't see any blood doesn't mean someone's not in distress internally, right? And it's the same thing in business. Just because you don't see blood doesn't mean your business isn't bleeding. And using the right metrics and using those metrics correctly is the only way you can ever figure that out.
Yeah. And that's another thing that's part of police training, is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Amazing. You know, I love it. I tell you, my early training was in a very different domain. It's in theater and film.
Okay.
And I have often found that although that may seem a little closer to, like, say, the world of digital and business and stuff than police, which maybe even feels farther, but still, I think a lot of people are surprised that that's what you're trained in. But actually, I see constant parallels to, you know, needing to bring people together and needing to combine technology and sort of a creative vision and create something that works for an audience. And it's just such a valuable exercise to take a domain where there's, especially in policing, where there's so much rigor and methodology, and I'm sure a lot of it's been tested and proven and all that. And I'm sure that not everything applies, but clearly, as you're demonstrating here, there's like a whole bunch of stuff that you're like, wow, that's immediately obviously applicable. So that's fantastic, and it's wonderful that you've done that for us, and you've kind of shown where all those points of connection are. Gives us a new way to think about our jobs running businesses, right? Because after all, that's part of not, you know, what I love about your topic is that both your topic is going against complacency, but in a way, there's a higher level, which is the very thing you're doing is also a way of fighting complacency, I think, which is looking at something from a different lens and saying, you know, if I wasn't looking at this situation as a business person, if I was looking at it as a police officer, how would I see it differently? And I think that that idea, we do a lot of, for example, when we do workshops to try to get companies to help look at problems in new ways, we'll often say, well, you know, how would you solve this problem if you were Walmart? Or how would you, and we have actually done, for example, the Marines will give a group like a Marine basic training manual and tell them, have them watch like a 5-minute video and then say, you know, okay, how would the Marines, now whether they've really internalized how the Marines would solve the problem isn't so much the point, is it gives you a different perspective on the problem. And all of a sudden you start thinking of it in a different way. And I love that. I think that's what you've done with this book, is say, let's look at business as you would as a police officer. And all of a sudden you realize there's all kinds of valuable angles and perspectives on that. And I thank you for that. I think it's really a fantastic book. And I definitely want to encourage everyone to get it. So before we wrap up, can you let everyone know anything you want them to know about where to get the book, where to learn more about you and what you do, or anything else you'd like folks, anyone who's like, that Len, man, he is fantastic. Where can I get more of that stuff? Where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, so I would here's a 2-step plan. First step is go to bevigilantbook.com. And that's where you can get the links to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Apple Books or wherever you buy your books. It's available in ebook. It's also available in hardcover and paperback. So bevigilantbook.com is where you can get that, and you can order your book today, and it'll show up or ship on October 14th. And then the other thing I would ask you to do is just connect with me on LinkedIn. Just look up Len Herstein on LinkedIn and connect with me and tell me. I'd love to hear from people where complacency is visible and evident in their lives now that they're thinking about it, because nobody ever thinks about it. And once they do, I mean, over and over again, I see the light bulbs go off, and I see people thinking, oh man, you know what? I haven't told my wife that I love her in a long time. You know, I mean, I just take it for granted that she knows, right? Little things like that. So we talk about that stuff too. We spent all our time talking about business. This stuff you'll find, and you'll do the connections in your own head, how it relates back to your life and your relationships with your family, with your children, with your parents, with your wife or husband or spouse or significant other or partner or whatever it is. You know, it's just as applicable, and you'll find making those connections can help you there as well.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we'll end with that. That sounds great. It sounds like it's a lot for one. If one book can give me all that, man, there's no question. I want that book. So thanks, Len. A great job. Congratulations on the launch of the book. I'm looking forward to the launch date itself. And I want to thank you for being here and sharing so much of your really, really interesting insight, really original content. And I really respect that. And I want to thank everybody for watching and listening to this, another episode of the Winning Digital Customers Livecast. Look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep transforming.